Well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you've been enjoying yourselves, learning lots, taking part in the panels, listening. The next speaker is someone that many of us have had the absolute pleasure of working alongside as the chief volunteer. I know she helped me and supported me so much during my by-election. She's a tireless advocate for the hope and hard work of our party. First elected as LPC president in 2018 at the Halifax Convention, her hometown, nonetheless. She has been acclaimed for her second term. Suzanne Cowan has been a volunteer for our party practically since the day she could walk. And we're not joking about that. And embodies our values through and through. We are so pleased to hear from Suzanne as she embarks on her second term as party president. Suzanne, so good to see you. It's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcy and Rachel. And thank you to all of you. You're doing such a fantastic job. And it's been so much fun to watch. I was actually talking this morning to my good friend and fellow former PTB chair, Robbie, out in Alberta, who was reminding me that when we were running in 2015, we were talking about making sure that we were voices for the ground and the regions across the country in Ottawa. And while, with this tremendous success of this convention so far, we absolutely are seeing that come to fruition. So thanks, Robbie, for reminding me of that. And I'm glad that you and the team out in Alberta are enjoying the convention. I know there's somebody else who I've been thinking about a lot over the last couple of days who I know would have just love this convention, the goodwill, the shared values, the shared aspirations and conversations about the future. And that's our former Prime Minister and leader, John Turner, who obviously we all know passed away this past year. I had the privilege of getting to know him and meeting him actually when he was on the campaign trail at the Greenwood Air Force Base in the 84 campaign. And I have such fond memories of that. I remember thinking he was so tall and I was so small, but here we were just sort of having this conversation. And isn't that what it's really all about? So all of these conversations that we're having, he really would have loved to be here, and my thoughts are with his family. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the tribute video on Thursday night, I encourage you to find it, because he was all about hope and hard work, and we're seeing that come to fruition. And hope and hard work is nothing new to this team. And in 2015, we ran on hope and hard work. And while, we've had to really dig deep this past year during the pandemic to find the hope, we certainly have lived up to our reputation of hard work. Je puis voir avec mes propres yeux qu'on est une partie composée des personnes qui n'hésitent pas à faire le travail nécessaire. On est une partie toujours prête à retrousser les manches pour aider son voisin. Et ces valeurs, les valeurs sont jamais plus importantes que pendant la dernière année. On partage ces valeurs avec les Canadiens. Un engagement profond et durable à se soutenir tous et chacun. We are absolutely, certainly a roll up your sleeves, help out your neighbor kind of party. And these values have never been more important than they are right now, never more necessary than over the past year. We share these values with Canadians, a deep and endearing commitment to each other and a commitment to look out for each other, because that's the Canadian way. COVID has certainly turned everything upside down in so many different ways and so many different times over the course of the last year, but not our sense of responsibility towards each other, and certainly not our passion for progressive vision that is needed now more than ever. Today, we can almost see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's so close, it's right there. So many more Canadians are getting vaccinated, my own parents included, and we're turning our attention towards what's next, the recovery. Canadians will be looking for us to help them and have their back in new and different ways. And we'll be looking to convince Canadians that we have the plan for the future that's worthy of a new majority mandate, because it reflects the Canada that we need right now. A Canada that's healthier and safer and cleaner and more competitive, more inclusive and fair for everyone. A future where we continue to look out for another and where we all have the opportunity to contribute. Because that's the Canadian way, And that's also our way, the liberal way. Cette dernière année, notre gouvernement a travaillé fort pour fournir aux Canadiens les supports qu'ils avaient besoin pour traverser ce tapis. Dans les prochaines semaines et prochains mois, on doit présenter aux Canadiens un plan audacieux et ambitieux pour le futur. A plan that's about fueling our economy, investing in green energy, protecting our most vulnerable, and building up our health and social infrastructure. We've got your back plan that's delivered by our incredible team of hardworking MPs who have been working shoulder to shoulder with their communities all through this very challenging time. We have the right plan. And when it comes time to go to the polls, we don't know when that's going to be, but when it comes time to go to the polls, I will be proud to take this plan. We won't concede one single ground of our progressive agenda, not one single inch. We are the progressive movement in Canada. We have the plan that is needed right now, and we have the leader and the incredible hardworking team to make it happen. And that includes each and every one of you out there today. Each and every one of you are a link to your community and a conduit to get our message and our plan out. You are the ones that are going to be at the kitchen tables and porches and grocery stores and wherever you're going to be talking, having these critical conversations with your family and your friends and your neighbors. We won't win this majority government without your continued hard work, riding by riding, poll by poll, right across the country. Because we don't know when the next one's going to be, but we know it will be won or lost on the ground. And thanks to the fact that we've opened up our party and eliminated membership fees, our party is stronger than ever, with more than 200,000 Liberals joining our movement and more joining every single day. Any Canadian who shares our values is welcome in our party. We have already nominated over 130 candidates, with more coming on the team each and every day. And over the past year, this is such a staggering number for me, over 10,000 of you, our amazing volunteers, have stepped up and have been working hard from your kitchen tables and your dining room tables and your kitchens. And well, let's face it, any quiet spot you can find to make a call or to make a connection. Je sais qu'on doit être mieux préparé pour la prochaine élection. Au cours de la dernière année, nous avons innové pour trouver les nouvelles façons de s'engager avec les Canadiens de toutes les provinces et territoires. We had over 10 weekends of action. We've reached out to over 1 million Canadians, and we had over 6,000 people participate in our policy development process. Just think about that. We had 6,000 people. That makes it the most open and accessible policy process in Canadian political history. And I've popped in and out of those workshops and was at the plenary this morning. And I have no doubt that lively, robust discussions are alive and well in the Liberal Party. Back in 2018, I committed to you about reinforcing our network of donors across the country. But I also asked you to step up and help me. And you did. You were listening. Thank you so much. We now have more Victory Fund donors than ever before, more grassroots fundraisers than ever before. Grassroots fundraising, that's now a Liberal thing. That's not a CPC thing anymore. This collective effort, your efforts and your generosity have enabled us to pay off our campaign debt and start to build towards the next one. And I'm so happy to report our best ever Q4 with, wait for it, more individual donors than any other party. And that is one we've been working towards. And thanks to you, we've gotten there, and we just need to keep building on that. We've really had to dig deep over the last year to show up every day, even in the middle of a pandemic. We have kept our eye on the ball and our steadfast belief that we could and would be stronger, more engaged, and a more connected party. But, and isn't there always a but? There's always a but. The work in many ways is just getting started. There's so much more that we need to do together. Being ready for the next election means redoubling our efforts, particularly in rural and remote ridings that have such unique challenges. And that means continuing to support the hardworking volunteers in the prairies who have committed to connecting with their communities. And we all of us right across the country have a role to play in connecting with rural and rural communities and making sure they have the support they need so that we can bring progressive Canadians wherever they are back into our fold, particularly in the regions that we lost. That also means harnessing new technologies. And I used to kind of be afraid of harnessing new technology or how we might do that. But I mean, looking at all of you and what we've been able to do this weekend, just embracing this technology and diving right in, I have no doubt, and with all the technologies we have coming online, I have no doubt in our ability, because we are already embracing and harnessing all the new technologies to reach as many people as possible. And of course, we have to maintain our strong financial footing. Winning the next election won't be easy. Ce ne serait pas facile. On a du succès comme libéraux quand on garde les priorités des Canadiens en tête, quand on ne prend pas notre succès pour acquis et quand on travaille fort et on garde nos valeurs au cœur de notre plan. Parce que laisser cette tâche les autres n'est pas une option. Leaving it to the other guys is definitely not an option. Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives want to take Canada back. That kind of rhetoric, that far-right populist rhetoric, is just dangerous. And they're doing it because they have no ideas, no plan. They don't even believe that climate change is real. The Conservatives have seen, that we've seen from them, that they don't care about values. They're not interested in what it takes to do the heavy lifting that Canadians deserve. They just want power. Erin O'Toole wants to take Canada back. So while he is focused on going back, we will be focused with working Canadians to move Canada forward. And let me just finish by saying thank you so much for all your support. I'm so proud to be able to carry on its position as president for the next period of time. Your trust and confidence in me is truly humbling. Thank you to all the members of the National Board who I've worked with over the last 3 years. It's truly been a privilege. Thank you for those that are leaving the board. Thank you to those who put their names forward this weekend for election. And welcome to the new members who will be joining our National Board over the next period of time. And thank you to the LPC staff. Your incredible hard work this weekend, but all the time, over the last year, redoubling your superhuman support that you've given to me, to the volunteers, and to our party. Thank you so much. You've given us a wonderful weekend, a wonderful chance to share opportunities. And I know that you're just gonna keep working hard. And I just feel so honored to be able to work with you. Merci pour votre travail acharné. And of course, to all of you out there who took this leap of faith to jump online with us for this convention. It's been wonderful, the positivity, all the different innovative ways, watching all the different chats and how everybody's been using them. Thank you so much for this, and thank you so much for what you do for our party every day. C'est un privilège de travailler avec vous tous ces 3 dernières années. Votre dynamisme me donne de l'énergie. Je crois fermement au mouvement et aux équipes qu'on va construisant pour continuer ensemble. Et j'ai hâte de le présenter aux Canadiens avec vous. I can't thank you enough for the past 3 years. It has just truly been an honor to work alongside you. I am so excited for what the future holds for us and the work we're going to do together. I get so much energy from the Zooms and the calls and everything that we do together. And I'm so excited and energized to take our team and our plan and show that to Canadians. And I want to do that with you. Thank you very much, and merci.
Merci beaucoup, Suzanne. Nous sommes tous très impatients de voir ce que le prochain mandat de ta présidence nous permettra d'accomplir. J'ai maintenant le plaisir de vous présenter les coprésidents de la Commission des peuples autochtones, Susie Kais, et Conrad Desjardins, qui nous parleront de la Fondation électorale autochtone. Alors que vous regardez les bannières défiler dans le haut de votre écran, nous vous encourageons à verser un don à la Fondation et à soutenir les campagnes fortes et gagnantes visant à élire des candidats autochtones. Merci Suzy et Conrad de vous joindre à nous.
Tanse. I'm here with Susie Keys to talk about the Indigenous Electoral Endowment Fund, the IEEF. First, I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you as a proud guest from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory.
Skino Anin, je vous parviens du Takaronto, le territoire traditionnel des Mississauga-Nucrédit, Haudenosaunee et Anishinaabeg.
The Indigenous Peoples Commission encourages the participation of Indigenous people at all levels of the Liberal Party of Canada, including members of Parliament. One way of achieving this goal is to assist in funding Indigenous electoral campaigns. The Indigenous Electoral Endowment Fund, the IEEF, was established to help us achieve this objective. It encourages Indigenous communities to become involved in the electoral process and assists with recruiting and assisting Indigenous candidates in getting elected. The IPC launched the Indigenous Electoral Endowment Fund at the Liberal Party of Canada Biennial Convention in 1998. I think it was March. Trustees of the fund are the co-chairs and vice-chair operations of the Indigenous Peoples Commission and the Chief Financial Officer of the Liberal Party of Canada. Susie?
Nous sommes particulièrement fiers que nous, non seulement on appuie les candidats autochtones avec des fonds pour leur candidature, mais aussi que nous pouvons les encourager, les aider à faire des connexions avec des mentors et des bénévoles qui participent dans les campagnes en faisant du porte-en-porte, des appels téléphoniques et même leur remonter le moral pendant des campagnes difficiles.
Since its launch, the Indigenous Electoral Endowment Fund has supported many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit candidates. Candidates like Tina Keeper, Dan Vandel, Michael McLeod, Aimee Batiste, and Yvonne Jones. The Liberal Party of Canada stands head and shoulders above any other party when it comes to electing Indigenous MPs. The results of election 42 and 43 represent the two highest ever amount of Indigenous MPs elected by any party. And this didn't happen by accident. Representation matters, and our continued goal is to increase Indigenous representation in Parliament. Our vision is to continue to build up our fund to assist Indigenous Liberal candidates in getting elected and re-elected to the House of Commons. During our past term, we have hosted IEF fundraisers across the country, starting in Halifax at the last biennial. It was our largest in-person fundraiser to date. We've also had successful fundraisers in Kelowna, Winnipeg, Mississauga, and IEF info sessions in Quebec City. These successful grassroots in-person fundraisers, they've allowed us to distribute during the 2019 election the highest amount to each candidate since the creation of the IEF. But now it's time to rebuild and replenish this fund so we can once again elect more Indigenous MPs. And to do that, we need your help.
En effet, Conrad, nous avons eu beaucoup de succès avec nos événements pour collecter des fonds, mais la CPA s'engage aussi à faire des ateliers pour appuyer les associations de conscription dans leurs efforts de rayonnement, et ça aussi contribue au succès de nos candidats autochtones.
The work of Indigenous candidates once in the House are legendary, and they've had generational impacts going back over 40 years ago when Len Marchand was first elected as an MP and later became a member of cabinet as Environment Minister, appointed by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Trailblazer Ethel Blond and Andrew was Minister of State for Northern Development and Children and Youth. The impactful work of Tina Keeper has had lasting reverberations throughout Canadian politics since she first introduced two private members' bills while in opposition back in 2008. Those two key pieces of legislation were Jordan's Principle and UNDRIP. So let's see. These Indigenous MPs, they make a difference every time they show up in the House. They are decolonizing the House in such a good way. There was Robert Falcon-Let speaking Cree, or Jaime Batiste speaking Micmac. They make Parliament a better and healthier place. Susie?
Nous pouvons aussi être fiers du respect accordé aux membres de Parlement autochtones, de leur collaboration avec les autres caucus pour promouvoir une société équitable pour tous. Les membres de Parlement autochtones font une contribution importante au Canada et notre futur collectif.
When you support Indigenous MPs and the vision of electing more Indigenous MPs by contributing financially to the Indigenous Electoral Endowment Fund, you make a difference too.
And your personal contributions are tax deductible. Donate now to the IEEF at the link above or at the IPC section at www.liberal.ca.
On behalf of the Indigenous Peoples Commission, thank you, merci, and enjoy the rest of LIB 2021.
Miigwech, Bamaki-Minois.
Thank you so very much, Susie and Conrad. Thank you for all of your work, and we'll continue to work with you. Our next panel is on Canadian leadership in a better world after COVID-19. As we continue to build back better, the work of the next group will be of extreme importance, not just in Canada, but right around the world. Please welcome Marc Arnault, Karina Gould, Harjit Sajjan, moderated by Marco Mendicino. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I think we're just waiting for Marco to join us, actually. So it's really wonderful to be able to greet everyone while, and hopefully everybody is really enjoying the convention. We have a lot to be very proud of.
Hi, everybody. So hope you're enjoying our panels. This next one will not disappoint. Our next panel is on Canadian leadership, and in fact, a better world post-COVID-19. So as we continue to build back better, the work of the next group will be of extreme importance, not just in Canada, but around the world. Please welcome Marc Arnault, Karina Gould, Harjit Sajjan, moderated by Marco Mendicino. The floor is yours.
Merci, Marcy. Thank you very much. And it's a real privilege to be joining you virtually from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Anishinaabe. Today's panel discussion is about Canadian leadership and a better world after COVID-19. Je suis honoré d'être accompagné de trois bons amis et collègues exceptionnels qui font avancer ce travail au nom de notre gouvernement de plusieurs façons, Marc, Karina et Harj. Bien que nous restions absolument déterminés à vaincre la pandémie ici au pays, le Canada a une longue et fière tradition de jouer un rôle important sur la scène internationale. From peacekeeping to supporting humanitarian efforts to taking on leadership roles in multilateral institutions to uphold human rights, the world continues to look to Canada to contribute in addressing the big issues of our time: COVID-19, climate change, global migration, and refugee resettlement. And as we heard last night in the discussion between Marc and Ben, the protection of democracy itself. Despite an ever-increasing complex geopolitical environment where all of these issues are interconnected, Canada is positioned to lead. We are a strong friend and ally, as we have demonstrated by renegotiating free trade agreements with the United States and Mexico, as well as in Europe and elsewhere. We continue to be a world leader in resettling refugees, something I know that progressive and liberals are very proud of. In fact, the last 2 years in a row, Canada was the #1 resettling country in the world. And as my friend Filippo Grande at the UNHCR described, Canada was a bright light in a very dark world last year. It's worth remembering that Operation Syrian Refugee celebrated its 5th anniversary, and we have now resettled over 70,000 Syrian Canadians here. And, I recently was able to participate in a citizenship ceremony where we have now seen those refugees take their next step in the journey to Canada. But we're not only doing that important work, we've also expanded our resettlement efforts with Yazidis, the survivors of Daesh, et même au Québec, pour les anges gardiens, qui était le demandeur d'asile qui avait contribué de niveau exceptionnel dans nos hôpitaux. So we have an ambitious plan, but there's much more work to do. The government is going to continue to invest in international development, and I know Karina will have some words to say about that. And we will also continue to stand up for human rights and the rule of law by taking a principled stand around the world. We know each of these priorities matters in a very concrete and tangible way, not only today, but for the future. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues by starting with the question to Harjit. Over the last year, our armed forces have stepped up in countless ways to support Canadians as we've all had to weather the pandemic. And we've seen the extraordinary service of our women and men in uniform in long-term care homes, and even more recently, in very critical vaccination campaigns in Northern Canada. Meanwhile, they stand at the ready to help with floods and forest fires, and I'm hoping you can take us through how you operationalize those priorities while balancing them against the pressing needs with the regular responsibilities of our armed forces abroad, including in Operations Impact and Reassurance. So with that, Harj, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Marco. First of all, it's great to be here with the entire Liberal family and to get that powerful vibe of wanting to make a positive impact on Canadians' lives. And as we talk about now, on the world as well. And no more important is that through our Canadian Armed Forces. I'm extremely proud. We're all proud of our Canadian Armed Forces members. And the pandemic has been difficult on Canadians, and especially the Canadian Armed Forces, especially when you look at last year, the losses that the Canadian Armed Forces had to endure. With our helicopter that went down on NATO operations, we lost our members there. And then when we had our snowbirds uplifting spirits all across the country, and the crash and a loss that we had with our personnel there, it is deeply sombering. And then even just in the recent months, it's a reminder to all Canadians that we're still dealing with systemic issues of the past. And that systemic issues of sexual harassment, sexual violence, racism, that we want to make sure that we do everything in our power to put the right policies in place, have support our survivors for coming forward, making sure that they have the right support and that they can have the just outcome that they deserve. But let's not forget one thing that we have always been committed to from the beginning. This is about creating an inclusive environment for all. We are not going to stop as a government. We're not going to stop as colleagues to making sure that we have an inclusive environment for all Canadians when they put the uniform on. And we're going to make sure that these policies are going to outlast ministers, are going to outlast any leadership and outlast any government so that it cannot be undone. Because as we talk about the important work that our Canadian Armed Forces do at very difficult times, it is challenging. Even the training is challenging. So when the pandemic hit, we had responsibility all over the world, whether it's in the Middle East, in Europe and NATO, in the Ukraine, in the Pacific. Drug interdiction that we do actually right now in right off the coast, southern coast of the US. So during the pandemic, one of the things that we were rightly set up for, because the defense policy that we put into place that was supported by the Prime Minister, is that we're going to be there for Canadians. So we put our troops on standby, making sure that we're going to be there for the vulnerable, making sure that we're going to have all the right resources to support the provinces at their time of need. And now we have seen the tremendous work that they have done, whether it's going to long-term care facilities in Quebec and Ontario, supporting Indigenous communities, the vulnerable in rural and remote areas, the logistical planning that it takes for whether it's PPE and the vaccination right now. All that is happening and is happening extremely well, while at the same time we're planning for floods and fire support. So we will be there for Canadians, while at the same time, we do have our commitment to our allies, and those commitments are important. We as a government are committed to multilateralism, stepping back on the world stage, getting back to NATO, making sure that we put the resources there, and we have done that. Making sure that we put credible support and to our allies in the Middle East in the fight against Daesh. And we've done that and had a tremendous impact. But also, let's not forget, we are a Pacific nation, making sure that we have a presence there so that we can have a positive influence in the region. And all this is because the defense policy that we as a government have put into place, a 20-year defense policy, but more importantly, the first time, we have actually put the funding, carved it out of the fiscal framework so that a defense minister doesn't have to go year by year asking for money. That's the commitment that we have put to our members in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Arj, it's inspirational to hear you touch on some really important themes, but the thing that strikes me the most is just the caliber of the individuals that serve on the front lines and in our armed forces, and just to hear you talk about it and the respect that comes across in the way that you describe that service on so many different fronts. You know, you mentioned the long-term care homes and how challenging that has been. You mentioned the campaigns up in the north, and you also talked about, you know, how we're going to continue to be there, even as internally we're really confronting head-on the challenges systemically, which have impacted not only our armed forces, but all institutions across government and across life. And the other thing that occurred to me is that as some of our political opponents, including the NDP, who continue to debate whether or not we should abolish the military altogether and pull out of NATO, we're here continuing to invest in the armed forces and supporting the women and men who serve in uniform. And, you know, that really just came across in your answers. So thank you for that. And maybe I'll turn now to Karina and Marc to see whether or not they'd like to add anything to Harj's comments.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll jump in just to say that, I mean, I think Harj did such a good job of highlighting and illustrating just how important and valuable the armed forces have been to Canadians, particularly over the past year, as we've seen them step up in long-term care. I mean, I think we all remember seeing those images last year, but there's still places where the armed forces are present, right, and doing that frontline work. But I'd also like just to comment a little bit on the work that they're doing internationally. You know, if we think about this time last year, there was a real scramble for PPE right around the world. Canada stepped up. We provided support to the WHO and PAHO, which is the Pan American Health Organization, and Harj made a CAF plane available so that they could assist the World Food Program and PAHO deliver PPE throughout the Caribbean and Central America. And I can just say that those deliveries made such a difference. They were almost all received by the president or the vice president or the prime minister. They were in countries that, you know, wouldn't have had like barely any PPE if it wasn't for both the financial support from Canada, but also the logistical support from the Canadian Armed Forces. And so I think that we just have so much to be proud of when it comes to what the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces have done, both at home here in Canada over the last year, but also right around the world.
Merci, Karina. Et de votre côté, Marc, peux-tu expliquer le rôle de nos forces au Québec particulièrement? Je sais qu'il y a beaucoup de défis dans le CHSLD avec nos anciens?
Oui, absolument. Et je dois admettre que je suis un peu biaisé parce que j'ai commencé ma carrière dans le militaire. J'étais dans la marine canadienne. Alors, j'ai toujours apprécié le travail que font nos militaires. Et on s'attend à beaucoup de choses de nos militaires. Et ils livrent la marchandise chaque fois. Et moi, je l'ai vu dans mon comté dans la dernière année avec les militaires qui sont venus dans les CHSLD dans mon comté et bien sûr à travers le Québec pour venir en aide à nos aînés. Alors ça, c'est un exemple où nos militaires sont là, ils n'hésitent pas, ils font le travail. Moi, j'en suis très, très fier. Et puis, à part de ça, bien sûr, ils vont tous les autres rôles traditionnels des militaires. Alors, je pense que en tant que Canadiens, on devrait être très, très fiers de nos militaires parce qu'ils sont là quand on en a besoin.
Et ça a fait une différence, oui, sur la Terre et dans la CHSLD, comme vous avez dit, oui?
Absolument, absolument, parce qu'il y avait un manque de personnel pour s'occuper d'une situation qui était très, très grave. Alors, heureusement qu'on a pu déployer rapidement ces militaires et ils sont venus dans les différents CHSLD, dans d'autres endroits où on avait besoin d'aider nos aînés. Et vraiment, la situation s'est beaucoup améliorée depuis ce temps-là.
Harj, any concluding words as we round out this first topic around the armed forces? I mean, clearly there is a lot on your plate and on the plate of the armed forces, but just to sort of summarize how you see us going forward to support the women and men who serve in uniform in their work here domestically and abroad.
Oh, first of all, I think this is a very important one. Far too often in the past, we get into debates about how much money is being spent on the Canadian Armed Forces. Well, when you actually do the analysis, it's clearly shown what type of investments. And when we came in 2015, it was shocking to see the amount of cuts that actually were being made. And there was the deficit reduction action plan that was in place, the strategic review that cut another $1 billion. We pulled back from NATO. And this whole conversation about more teeth, less tail really hurt the Canadian Armed Forces because our infrastructure suffered. More importantly, our people suffered because we didn't have the right resources. When you talk about supporting your people, you got to put the resources there. So when we put our defense policy together, that was widely consulted all across the country with our allies, stakeholders. Number one thing was about look after your people. So that's one of the reasons why in our policy, chapter number 1 is about our people. And when you put it as a policy as a government, you put resources to it. And finally, I just want to say is we have done something as a government that previous governments have never done, which is add the money to the defense policy for the entire duration of the defense policy. And that's exactly what we're going to do with the NORAD modernization as we look at continental defense. So as we look at the North, and one message we want to send is anything we do in the North, we're going to make sure it's going to have a dual purpose for the community that we're serving up there in the high Arctic as well, but also how the people can benefit. Just like NORAD modernization brought a long time ago, the telephone into the North. Well, we're going to look at opportunities now. How can we look at bringing broadband? How are we going to look at the technologies that we need for our sovereignty can benefit the people? So we're always going to be focused on supporting Canadians and focusing our people, but making sure that our women and men have the resources for the work that a government sends them off to do.
Well, and your commitment to the armed forces shines through, Harj, and I know that going forward, we're going to continue to support all of them and to continue to do the work that we have to do both here and abroad. And just using some of the comments that Karina had made about the important role, the essential role that our armed forces are playing around the world, contributing to food security. I'm wondering if we can now sort of extend that into the next part of our conversation, which will be about how Canada is supporting humanitarian efforts abroad. Le Canada est une chef de file humanitaire et le gouvernement a apporté une contribution importante pour soutenir les plus vulnérables du monde entier, y compris dans le domaine de la réinstallation des réfugiés, comme j'avais déjà dit. Comment ces efforts comptent-ils des initiatives comme le travail critique que nous avons accompli en Syrie et au Venezuela? Karina.
Bon, mais merci Marco. Et si je pourrais commencer pour dire que c'est vraiment un plaisir d'être partie d'une équipe qui voit que soit la réponse sécuritaire, soit la réponse humanitaire, soit la réponse pour établir les réfugiés et donner la bienvenue aux réfugiés aussi au Canada ou à la diplomatie, que c'est un projet de tout le gouvernement. Et c'est vraiment un plaisir de travailler avec toute notre équipe parce que ça fait que chaque enjeu que nous ciblons est vraiment meilleur pour ça. Alors, je voudrais commencer avec ça. Mais sur la question des besoins humanitaires et surtout sur les crises assez grandes comme la Syrie ou le Venezuela, nous pourrions être très fiers de la réponse du Canada. Le Canada est un des répondeurs plus grands dans le monde. En question de Syrie, on peut savoir que cette année, ça fait 10 ans depuis le début du crise au Syrie. C'est vraiment une des crises qui a eu l'impact humanitaire le plus grand au monde. 70 000 Syriens sont ici maintenant au Canada, mais il y a plus de 13 millions de Syriens, soit dans Syrie ou dans les pays dans le proche, aux pays voisins, qui ont toujours besoin de l'assistance humanitaire. Et le Canada vient d'annoncer que nous serons là et nous continuerons avec notre aide humanitaire. And if I can just say on Syria, I mean, we have been one of the largest players both inside of Syria with regards to humanitarian assistance, but also in the neighboring countries such as Jordan and Lebanon. And similar to Venezuela, Canada has really been a pioneer in terms of how we're providing humanitarian assistance, particularly in neighboring countries, recognizing that we can't just provide humanitarian assistance to the refugees themselves, but also to the host communities so that there's more of an accepting and welcoming stance when it comes to refugees, particularly in countries which themselves already face very big development challenges. And maybe just on Venezuela, for me, this is one of the crises that I'm most preoccupied with, and one that I think we need more attention on, because it's coming up to, if trends continue this year, it's going to exceed Syria in the number of refugees that have left their country. And, we don't think about it as much because we don't see those same kind of migration caravans that we saw with Syria, but the outflow is just as strong, and it's having just as big an impact on neighboring countries that, are taking on the bulk of receiving those migrants and those refugees. And so Canada has been one of the top donors, but we're also going to be hosting the Venezuela Migration Donor Pledging Conference in June, taking a real leadership role in the hemisphere. And these are just two of the crises that are going on in the world right now. But if there's one thing that I'd like everyone to take away from this conversation is that while, the World Food Program, for example, estimated a doubling of people in need of food security, a doubling of people going into extreme poverty this year. And in fact, we're seeing it play out in real time. Canada has been one of the few countries that not only hasn't cut our official development assistance this year, we've actually grown it. So we've contributed an additional $1.7 billion this fiscal year alone to our official development assistance. At a time when the world needs more Canada, Canada is stepping up and Canada is responding on the humanitarian front when it comes to COVID-19. We've been there, and I think everyone can and should be really proud of what we've been able to accomplish and how we've been able to rally the world.
Well, Karina, I have to say a lot of that success has to do with your advocacy. And I know you and I have spoken in particular about the Venezuelan situation, but it's not the only real crisis that we are confronting. And it is a source of pride, not only for our government, but I think for Canadians themselves, that we have continued to help to resettle refugees despite the pandemic, keeping those corridors open, working with the UN, working with the IOM, overcoming the challenges of still finding ways to protect life. And that is something that we can attribute to the hospitality, the compassion, the generosity of Canadians. And so I know that you're very passionate and committed to this work, as am I. And perhaps what I'll do is turn it over now to Harj and to Mark to see whether or not they wish to add anything to this important discussion about supporting humanitarian efforts abroad, but equally about the role that we play in the world in helping to resettle refugees. Harj.
Well, thanks, Mark. And I want to commend Karina for the tremendous work that is done that doesn't sometimes get the same highlight as other work, because there is no glory in prevention, but it's so essential. We talk about how we dealt with a crisis, and especially when it comes to conflicts. But what we focus on really is how to prevent conflict from occurring. And a lot of the work that what Karina is talking about is actually about preventing. So when we as a government have been working from a whole government perspective, how do we intervene early on? Look at the early signs, look at the root cause of various things, and how can we support in a meaningful way? Not so that we get something in return. All right, it's about supporting. When everybody benefits, then when we support in a genuine way, we all benefit. And I think that's extremely important. And so when I travel around the world, looking at it from conflict zone to conflict zone, I spent a lot of time on meeting with the NGOs, the development work, because it's extremely important. And Karina knows this because I think after my Africa trip, she came afterwards, and we were able to tag team extremely well. So I think it's very important we don't look at the work in separate ways. And it's something we as a government have been doing from day one, when we make an announcement as a government to provide support, we do it in a whole of government way. And Mark plays obviously an extremely important role in this. And something that we as ministers actually, myself, Mark, Karina, and Mary, coordinate our work almost every week.
Merci, Harj. Et maintenant, je vais passer la parole à Marc. Marc, quelle est votre vision du rôle que le Canada devrait jouer dans l'aide humanitaire, et même dans le contexte de tout le travail que nous faisons pour aider les demandeurs d'asile, les réfugiés, où à ce moment-là, nous avons une situation qui est vraiment complexe, vraiment dynamique et vraiment difficile. Marc.
Bien, rapidement, merci beaucoup. Karina a décrit l'aide humanitaire que le Canada fournit. Elle a parlé de la Syrie, elle a parlé du Venezuela. Harj a parlé de la présence militaire qui existe parfois, par exemple en Irak en ce moment. Moi, je vais parler d'un autre aspect rapidement. On a parlé de la Syrie et de l'Irak, une région du monde qui a passé à travers une période extrêmement difficile avec la présence de Daesh. Et puis, c'est à cause de la coalition qui s'est formée qu'on a pu éliminer, pour le moment, la menace de Daesh. Maintenant, ces pays-là ont besoin d'une présence humanitaire pour les aider. Ils ont besoin d'une présence militaire pour stabiliser les choses, mais aussi le Canada fournit de l'aide pour les opérations de paix et de stabilité. Moi, j'ai annoncé récemment 43 millions de dollars pour la région de la Syrie et de l'Irak pour essayer d'instaurer une stabilité dans ces pays-là pour éliminer la menace d'un retour de Daesh. Alors, c'est une région très fragile dans le monde. Ils ont besoin d'aide humanitaire, d'une présence militaire, mais également, ils ont besoin de projets qui vont les aider à se stabiliser pour l'avenir. Et le Venezuela est un autre exemple. Karina a mentionné, vous savez que 5 millions de citoyens de ce pays ont quitté ce pays. C'est un pays qui n'a pas une sécurité alimentaire en ce moment. C'est une situation très, très difficile. Alors, on essaie d'aider du côté diplomatique. Notre collègue Chrystia Freeland a travaillé avec plusieurs pays des Amériques, le groupe Lima, pour essayer de trouver des solutions pour le Venezuela. Moi, j'ai récemment parlé avec Juan Guaido, qui est le chef de l'opposition du Venezuela, et on travaille avec d'autres pays pour essayer de trouver des solutions pour qu'on puisse ramener la démocratie à ce pays. C'est une grosse tâche, mais ça fait partie de notre travail. Alors, il y a le côté humanitaire, il y a le côté militaire, mais il y a aussi le côté des solutions diplomatiques. Et on doit travailler sur ces différents paliers-là pour essayer d'améliorer la situation.
Vous avez beaucoup de raisons et nous avons réduit le menace de Daesh et cela a beaucoup de voir avec le rôle de les forces armées y ont joué. Mais je pense que la pression est toujours là en termes de migration. And that's one of the reasons why, particularly for survivors of Daesh, we launched a program that would help to resettle 1,400 survivors of Daesh, the vast majority of whom were Yazidis. And, you know, in the work that we're doing, and I think collectively in all of our portfolios, we've been able to further expand the work that we are doing under that particular initiative so that more Yazidis can be reunited with their loved ones who are still very much facing the pressure of being displaced from their homes as a result of the carnage and suffering that was caused by Daesh. So even though the conflict may have subsided, people are still searching for a better life, and Canada is playing an extremely important role in that context. But perhaps I'll turn it back now to Karina just to round out this important discussion around humanitarian aid and the work that we're doing in resettling refugees before we turn to Mark for the last question.
Sure. Well, thanks, Marco. And I mean, I think that what is really clear is that there are, you know, kind of four stools here, right? I mean, we have the diplomacy, development, defense, but then we also have all of the work when it comes to immigration and refugees and resettlement. And I think what really makes Canada unique on the world stage is our truly whole of government approach. And the other thing is that we tend to come in without a specific agenda, in the sense that we don't have the colonial baggage of the past as an exterior actor coming in. Obviously, we have a colonial legacy here at home, but it's a different view. And I think Canada is generally viewed around the world as having a genuine interest in helping to alleviate human suffering and work towards greater human dignity. And that's what informs us. And it's really, you know, just a real privilege to get to work with colleagues who share that view, and amazing when we get to see the fruits of our labor and people being better off, whether it's in their home countries or in a country where they've been resettled.
Well, thank you, Karina. And really, I think your ability to articulate the work that we're doing abroad is really inspiring, and I know will appeal to progressives and indeed all Canadians. Now we're going to turn to our last question. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes to, you know, sink our teeth into, I think, the big picture and Canada's role in defending human rights. And I just want to start by contrasting, I think, the approach our party has taken since we took the reins in 2015, where after 10 years of the last Conservative government, we saw cuts to humanitarian aid, we saw disengagement in multilateral institutions. And, you know, since then, what we have seen is Canada coming back and being engaged, but at a very complex moment. And Mark, I'm really hoping you can sort of shed light on your vision of the role that the government of Canada and that Canada writ large should be playing in creating a safer, more secure and prosperous world, even as we have to navigate the global pandemic and climate change and global migration and an assault on human rights at perhaps a rate that we have not seen anytime recently. So, you know, with that, I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
Well, thank you very much. Certainly, there are challenges in this present time, and Canada, being a country that's open on the world, wants to play a role. And Canadians have always wanted Canada to play a role because of the principles and values that we espouse, whether it's with respect to democracy, whether it's with respect to human rights or the rule of law. Canada has in the past and can continue to play a role. And we are doing this more and more now by working with our partners. A multilateral cooperation approach, we think, is important because when we speak with many voices, we have more impact and we have a greater chance of affecting change. And there are, in this present day and age, more authoritarian countries, and it is more important than ever for Canada to speak up and to do so multilaterally. And there are some examples recently. One that our colleague, that I'm very proud of what he did, François-Philippe Champagne, in coming up with what's called the Declaration on Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations. Well, through his work, we are now at 61 countries which have signed this declaration, and it very clearly says to countries that practice arbitrary detention that this is totally unacceptable. And this is a group of 61 countries from all the continents. So this is a good example of multilateral cooperation to effect change. And I'm quite confident that that group is going to continue to grow. Recently, we, as a country, Canada, along with other allies, imposed sanctions on China for the treatment of Uyghurs. Recently, we put sanctions on Russia for the way they annexed Crimea and also the way they are treating one of their politicians, Alexei Navalny, and they of course attempted to kill him, and they also have thrown him in jail. We have spoken up along with our other countries and that our partners, and that way we have a greater effect. Canada has engaged in a lot of multilateral organization. We're part of the G7, the G20, the United Nations, of course, but also La Francophonie, the Commonwealth, organizations like the WTO and the World Health Organization, the Organization of American States. We work well within these multilateral groups in trying to bring our contribution to instilling the values that are so important to Canadians and trying to ensure that those values are also shared by other countries in the world. So multilateralism is a natural fit for Canada, and we're going to continue to do it. We've talked about all of the roles that we do when we are open to the world. We're a trading nation, and of course, that is where we form free trade agreements with the United States and Mexico, with the Europeans, with the Pacific countries, with CPTPP. This is important for our prosperity. We talk about international development. Karina is the one who does all that work. We talk about our defense requirements and security requirements. And we do this in the context of NATO, and we do it in the context of our bilateral with the United States for NORAD that Harj was talking about. So we play a role on many different levels when we reach out to the world. And when we do it in a multilateral context, we have a greater chance of affecting change. And that, I think that the examples I've given are very pertinent. And I will say one last thing, and I think it's very important, and I think it's very encouraging. The administration in the United States that has now taken over in the last few months is very much more open to multilateralism, as we've seen President Biden re-engaging with the World Health Organization. The Paris Accord challenges the involvement of the United States with NATO. This is very encouraging to have a neighbor who shares with Canada that the importance of taking a multilateral approach in terms of trying to change the world to make it more democratic, more peaceful, and ultimately more prosperous.
Well, I think you engaged in a fantastic conversation last night with Ben Rhodes, the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama on that front. And certainly, I think he underlined that concern that we all share, that in addition to the phenomenon that the world is confronting together, there is an increasing challenge to our democratic institutions, but the coalition of the willing, the coalition of those who share the principles on which Canada was founded, the United States was founded, our friends in Europe was founded, is one of the ways in which we can make a direct impact. And you mentioned sanctions, you mentioned the condemnation of the assault of human rights, you mentioned expanding trade with our friends and allies to ensure that Canadians have access to goods and services so that we can be competitive as well abroad, really does tie together. I think the way that Canada is continuing to play a truly inspiring role on the world stage. And Marc, I just want to thank you for your leadership. And clearly, you have been well served both by your experiences in the armed forces, but we've talked about this a lot. Your work as part of as an astronaut in space, and as Canada's first astronaut in space, something that is really inspiring. So maybe just a few last quick words to Karina and Harj before we wrap it up.
Sure. Well, I think one key point that Marc raised was multilateralism. And, Canada is a middle power, and, to be able to exert influence, really doing it through multilateralism in partnership with other like-minded countries, and even sometimes some countries that aren't like-minded will continue to be really important for us. And I think a number of the issues that Marc raised, and we maybe didn't get a chance to dig into enough during this short time, are issues that confront us as a globe or as humanity, right? I mean, if we're thinking about COVID-19, what better example do we have of an issue that, it doesn't know borders, it doesn't care about borders, right? It doesn't matter where you live. It's something that impacts us as humanity. And so having a global multilateral approach is something that we have to do in order to truly address it. And the other area that I would just say is climate change. And this is where what Marc was talking about with the new administration in the United States, we have a really exciting opportunity, I think, this year, particularly, in the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow, to really have a global commitment and solution and plan, when it comes to fighting climate change. And certainly, the work that we are all doing together. I know we've spoken about what we're doing domestically, but the work that we're doing internationally is also really important, because we won't be able to solve climate change just within our borders. We have to play a role on the world stage. And that's something that Canada has been doing. And, I'm looking forward to continuing to do that work. And maybe just one final point, because you mentioned Ben Rhodes' conversation, and I thought Marc did such a great job talking to him yesterday. But one of the things that Ben Rhodes said was our biggest foreign policy asset is living our values, is making sure that we continue to be an example to the world. So that means being a welcoming, inclusive, democratic, pluralistic society. That is the best thing that we can project out to the world.
Harj?
Thanks, Marco. You know what? Unilateral finger wagging doesn't work. That's why multilateral is so important. Multilateralism is so important, and we need to be mindful that being present, being there for each other as allies, also allows us to have a greater influence as well. And so that our engagement in the world that we have been doing for the last 5.5 years has given us that opportunity. Look at the work that we're doing in Ukraine. When we speak together as part of the Quint, as we call it, we're able to have a much stronger voice, whether it's in the Pacific. We're able to convene conversation because we're demonstrating the whole of government effort. And it's being recognized by our allies. And that is so important right now, because as Karina talked about the crisis that we all face, in terms of conflict, well, conflict happens for a certain reason, the ripple effect of that. A climate crisis is also a security crisis, right? When people can't have food and when they can't farm and stuff, the desertification that ends up happening. Well, when people have no choice for their future, what do? They get recruited by other organizations. How did Daesh grow? So we have to start asking those tough questions. And that's one thing that I'm really proud that our government has done, is always look at a whole of government approach in our efforts.
Merci à tout le monde. Je suis très fier de travailler avec vous. Je suis fier de travailler avec vous faites. Je suis fier des autres membres de notre équipe sur la direction de le Premier ministre. Certainly, just listening to you all, I know that Canada is continuing to play that leadership role in the world at a very, very critical time, consistent with our traditions and certainly with hope and optimism going forward. And I know that the group of you are really tight on the global affairs sort of portfolio, and you kind of refer to yourselves as the Avengers. So I say, Avengers assemble, keep doing the great work. Really good to be with you. Merci,
Marco. Marco,
What's
can I
that?
just have 10 seconds just to say something very quick? I just want to,
Yeah, for sure.
just very quickly is, you know, everything that we do when it comes to our Canadian Armed Forces, as politicians, we give speeches, and you know what, they give meaning to the words that we put into our speeches because the actions that our women and men take. And going back to the inclusive environment that we are committed to, that work just doesn't happen easily. I just want to thank all the women as part of the Liberal family that are on our team who have been providing such recommendations, doing the hard work also to help guide me in my portfolio from day one, not now, from a long time ago. And I actually want to really highlight Nita Vandenbelt, my parliamentary secretary, Karen McCrinnan, who's also a veteran herself and the chair of the National Defence Committee, and Minister Monsef, and everybody. So I just want to thank them personally, because it wasn't for them, we can't have a team to make this work. No one individual can bring out make the changes that we need. So thank you again to all of them.
Could not have ended it on a better note. Thank you to all three of you. Thank you to our colleagues. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Back over to our co-chairs.
Thank you to Marco, Mark, Karina, and Harj for your passionate and interesting discussion in the last panel that touched on the many aspects of how Canada is continuing to lead in the world. I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has been working so hard these last 3 days behind the scenes. I had someone texting me last night asking if the conference was live because it was going so smoothly. Well, it is, but that just shows how great the team is doing to deliver a great convention in this virtual environment. Our next panel is going to be a really good one. We all know that women have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic. I've seen it in my riding, I've seen it in my family. Our next panel is going to tackle issues faced by women and girls throughout this pandemic and moving forward. Our co-chair, Rachel Bendayan, will moderate a conversation with Chrystia Freeland, Mary Ng, Melanie Jolie, and Diane LIB2021 on the topic of how to go from a she session to building back better. Over to you, Rachel.
Merci beaucoup, Terry. Ça fait tellement plaisir de pouvoir animer cette discussion avec 4 invités de marque. Chrystia Freeland, Mary Ng, Diane LIB2021, and Melanie Jolie, you are all very well known to all Liberals and quite certainly role models to women and girls right across our country. We know that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women like me who are mothers of young children, women entrepreneurs who are fighting for the survival of their businesses, women working in the hospitality and tourism sectors, which have been so hard hit. And the topic that we are addressing today of how we attack this she session we are in is important not only to women, but to all Canadians, because our economic recovery depends on the full participation of women in our economy. Alors, je suis tellement heureuse de vous avoir toutes les 4 pour cette discussion si importante et sans plus tarder, rentrons dans le vif du sujet. Nous entendons souvent dire que la COVID-19 a provoqué une récession pour les femmes ou she session en bon français. J'aimerais donc demander à nos panélistes de nous expliquer un peu ce que cela signifie pour vous et dans vos collectivités, de façon vraiment pratico-pratique. Pourquoi est-ce qu'il est si important d'avoir une reprise féministe, intersectionnelle? Peut-être on pourrait commencer avec Mary.
Rachel, thank you so much. And it's terrific to be here with my wonderful colleagues in Chrystia, in Melanie, and Diane. And this pandemic has been really quite difficult for everyone. But we're here because we're talking about a she session. And if I just sort of share the stories across the country that I hear so much in my day-to-day work, it really is, if you think about it, women who are raising their children and trying to keep their companies and their small businesses going. So many of businesses that are in the most highly affected sectors are owned by women. Some of the smallest businesses are also owned by women. And they are particularly impacted as a result of COVID-19. And then if you intersect in there, the racialized businesses or racialized women, women who are new immigrants who have just but started to get their foot into building their small business, they're particularly impacted as a result of COVID-19. So throughout the pandemic, we've had to do many things to help support these terrific women entrepreneurs, women-owned businesses, women in general, through the range of supports that we have put together. But this has had a disproportionate impact, this pandemic, on women across the country. But I also sort of say that there is 2 numbers that I often look at being the small business minister. One number is $150 billion, and the second number is a $12 trillion number. And why is that? The investments that we have made well before COVID-19 to help women get that leg up and to create an inclusive economy means that by simply doing one thing, which is adding women to the economy, will yield $150 billion to Canada's economy. And if the world follows suit, it's $12 trillion, the global economy. So do we need to have real strategies to deal with the full participation of women coming out of this She session? Absolutely.
Thank you, Mary. I mean, I know that you speak to women entrepreneurs every day and your leadership has been so important. Mélanie, est-ce que tu voulais enchaîner?
Oui, mais en fait, je pense que le fait simplement qu'on puisse en parler, toutes les femmes ensemble, de ce phénomène qui est la récession pour les femmes, démontre qu'on a une lentille féministe en soi comme gouvernement et que le fait d'identifier le problème va nous amener à des solutions. Because we can't think we're trying to solve an issue if we're actually not trying to identify it. And the fact we're talking about this She session helps us and shows how much we're targeted about the issue. Mary referred to entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs being deeply impacted because they're in the sectors of the economy that are mostly impacted: hospitality, tourism, the service sector. Definitely women staying at home because the kids' school is in virtual mode. We've seen that, we know that, but the issue is now, and that will be the ballot question eventually, for sure. What is the world after the pandemic? What it will mean for me and my kids and my parents and my family. And so that's why we need a plan. And that's why the question of childcare is extremely important. On le sait, Rachel, Diane et moi, on vient du Québec. On est fiers du système qui a été bâti au Québec au niveau des garderies. On sait aussi qu'il manque de place en garderie. On sait qu'il y a plusieurs femmes qui voudraient envoyer leurs enfants dans les CPE et malheureusement, ils sont sur des listes d'attente pendant des années et ce qui fait en sorte que ça coûte cher. Et ça ne les aide pas non plus à regagner le marché du travail. C'est le cas au Québec, mais la situation est encore plus exacerbée à l'extérieur du Québec. Donc, je pense que d'avoir un bon plan de match pour la question des garderies, c'est important. L'autre phénomène que l'on voit beaucoup à travers cette pandémie, qui est certainement vraiment un drame, c'est l'augmentation des féminicides. Donc, we've seen an increase in gender-based violence throughout the pandemic. One of the first things that we did during the first lockdown, and I remember it was due to the leadership of our colleague, the Minister of Gender Equality, Mariam Monsef, was really to increase funding for women shelters. We saw a spike in the calls to these shelters at the beginning of the pandemic. The anxiety is high, folks across the country. You know it, we know it. And that's why we have to show that we're there for women that are going through very, very difficult times right now. La situation des féminicides au Québec a été extrêmement préoccupante. On a décidé de travailler avec le gouvernement du Québec sur cette question-là, d'augmenter le financement aux maisons et aux refuges pour personnes, pour femmes en difficulté. On va continuer de le faire. Et finalement, je pense qu'on peut tous s'inspirer des histoires que l'on entend dans nos familles. Rachel, tu faisais référence au fait que tu es une jeune maman et on le voit dans nos familles. On le voit certainement avec nos amis, avec nos collègues. Et donc, basé sur toutes ces histoires-là, on va vouloir s'inspirer des meilleures idées pour être en mesure justement d'avoir un bon plan de match. Et je suis confiante que notre ministre des Finances aura de bonnes solutions pour nous lors du budget 19 avril prochain.
Ben oui, et ça s'en vient rapidement. Je suis tout à fait d'accord, Mélanie. J'ai moi-même attendu, même au Québec, 3 ans avant d'avoir une place à la garderie. Alors, c'est très important qu'on s'y attaque. Diane, à toi la parole.
Écoutez, moi, je peux vous dire que c'est un sujet que j'ai vraiment à cœur au niveau de tout ce qui concerne les femmes. Et on a vraiment pu constater que la période de la pandémie a été catastrophique pour les femmes partout à travers le Canada. Puis ça a été au niveau mondial. Et je pense que trop longtemps, on a pris pour acquis le travail des femmes. C'est une espèce de non-reconnaissance aussi de toute l'implication des femmes au niveau là, des différents services. Puis pour moi, là, la pandémie, on doit vraiment là, devenir un levier pour pouvoir permettre une reprise économique qui va être inclusive, une reprise économique aussi qui va amener une équité au niveau du plan salarial pour les femmes. Et j'ai un intérêt aussi particulier pour les femmes qui sont en région, les femmes de milieu rural, où pour nous, la reprise économique, parce qu'on a un enjeu démographique qui est important, on a un vieillissement de la population, donc on va avoir besoin pour le développement des milieux ruraux, on va avoir besoin d'immigration, on va avoir besoin d'inclure des gens, on va avoir besoin de diversité en milieu rural et on va avoir besoin aussi de pouvoir accueillir, de pouvoir offrir pour pouvoir garder ces femmes-là dans nos milieux. On va avoir besoin de logements, on va avoir besoin de places en garderie, on va avoir besoin aussi d'éducation auprès de nos communautés pour avoir une ouverture à l'autre personne, à ces femmes-là qui vont venir chez nous de d'autres cultures. Puis j'avais l'habitude de dire, moi, là, il n'y a rien de plus beau pour moi qu'une courte pointe. Une courte pointe, ça a toutes sortes de couleurs. Puis c'est ce qui fait là, la beauté de la diversité là, au sein des régions. Donc, moi, peu importe la couleur des gens, peu importe la religion, peu importe l'orientation sexuelle, peu importe l'âge, on va devoir intégrer les femmes handicapées au niveau des femmes autochtones et des femmes qui vont venir là, d'un peu partout pour pouvoir bâtir une économie qui va être forte au niveau de nos régions. Donc, d'avoir des outils pour permettre à ces femmes-là, à nos femmes entrepreneurs, on va avoir besoin de l'Internet, on va avoir besoin de la téléphonie cellulaire, on va avoir besoin de garderie. C'est inconcevable pour moi qu'en 2021, qu'il y ait des femmes qui disent, nous, on doit mettre un frein à notre maternité parce qu'on n'a pas de place en garderie. On ne peut pas retourner au travail parce qu'on n'a pas de place en garderie. Donc, on va devoir travailler tout le monde ensemble, tous les paliers de gouvernement. On va avoir besoin des groupes de femmes, des paliers municipaux, provinciaux, fédéraux. On va avoir besoin des hommes aussi pour pouvoir permettre aux femmes de donner cet espace-là pour qu'on prenne notre place. Donc, comme je vous dis, là, c'est une opportunité, là, la pandémie, pour vraiment pouvoir progresser, puis d'avoir là, un développement qui va être vraiment, comme je disais, inclusif et équitable.
Je suis tout à fait d'accord, Diane. The importance of addressing the She session, not only from an urban perspective, but also taking into consideration our rural and remote areas and also the cultural differences among women, so important. Peut-être pour tourner vers Christia, cette semaine, vous avez pris part à plusieurs rencontres internationales virtuelles. Vous l'avez soulevé plus tôt lors de ce congrès. Vous êtes en contact constant avec les ministres des Finances de partout à travers le monde. Comment voyez-vous l'évolution de ce thème sur la scène internationale?
Merci Rachel pour la question. Et je veux commencer en disant à quel niveau je suis d'accord avec Diane. Et Diane, je pense que ce que vous avez dit, c'est que pour bâtir une économie forte, inclusive, on a besoin d'infrastructures. Infrastructures physiques comme accès à Internet et infrastructures sociales comme les garderies. On a besoin de tous les deux aux régions, dans les grandes villes autour de notre pays. And, you know, Rachel, that's a very good question. This past week happens to have been the week of the annual spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. And one interesting thing that really struck me at those meetings and in hindsight is we're at this moment in time when some of the key economic jobs in the world are actually being done by women. So the US Secretary of the Treasury for the first time is a woman, Janet Yellen. I was in 5 meetings with her last week. I think I saw her
I think we may have just lost your connection, Cristia.
They're still a minority in this universe. But just having a few in these key roles is so mutually reinforcing. So at the G20 meeting, there were about more than 40 speakers. I was like around speaker number 20. I was the first person to say the word woman. And I pointed that out. And I said, gentlemen, you know, in all of our countries, women are hit hardest by the COVID recession. And the policies that we put in place need to address that. And what was so nice was then I immediately got a text from Kristalina Georgieva saying bravo and giving me those hand clap emojis. So that was very supportive, very reinforcing. And then on Friday, we have sort of a meeting just of the finance ministers of the Western Hemisphere, our neighborhood. And the first speaker was Secretary Yellen. And she made a point right in her opening remarks in saying a personal priority for her is the full economic inclusion of women and girls and full legal rights for women and girls. And then she said something that Diane has just said that I agree with so strongly. She said, that's because when you do that, the whole economy benefits. And that is so true. And I feel we're kind of at a pivotal moment, certainly in Canada, but I would say even more broadly in the world, when we can really make this case that people are really starting to get it. And I think that that can have a profound impact on economic policy, but probably more importantly, because ultimately, who cares so much about policy? What we care about is our lives. I can think that that can have a profound impact on the prosperity, the well-being of every single Canadian.
Thank you, Cristia. I hope I'm not overstepping by saying that I think all Liberals are so proud to have you sitting around that table. It is wonderful to see Canada's first female finance minister taking such an active role on this issue internationally and here at home. And I'd like to ask all of our panelists now to walk us through a little bit about what we've done to advance gender equality up until now and what opportunities are emerging during this recovery to further accelerate our efforts. Melanie, let me start with you.
Merci beaucoup, Rachel. Well, obviously, we all know that the Prime Minister in 2015 appointed its first gender parity cabinet. And I think since that time, we've seen clearly the solutions that we've been able to put forward for Canadians, from the Canada Child Benefit to much more supporting an approach in terms of gender-based violence and helping really many resources hit the ground running to help people having these issues. Also, when we were able to really help in terms of parental leave. But I think we're looking at another step now, which is really what the recovery will look like. Cristia just talked about it in terms of what can be the policies of the future to help women to participate more in the workforce. What I can say is during the pandemic itself, through the regional development agencies, a lot of the small businesses that were not able to really have access to the big measures such as the wage subsidy and the rent relief, etc. Basically, the businesses falling through the cracks came to see us. And we now know that in many regions, 50% of the support we've given overall was given to women-led businesses. So it shows how much, that lens was important and how much women were able basically to have access to that help to survive, because the entire idea of this program was to make sure that these businesses and these entrepreneurs were able to bridge and get out of the pandemic in order to keep the jobs, the people they were employed in, and also their own job. Si vous me le permettez, ma chère Rachel, en tant que coprésidente de la campagne aussi, j'aimerais aussi m'adresser aux gens qui nous écoutent parce que là, on parle dans le fond de la relance, on parle de la réouverture de l'économie, on essaie de regarder vraiment la lumière au bout du tunnel alors qu'il y a de la vaccination un petit peu partout à travers le pays. Mais le plus important, c'est que dans la prochaine campagne électorale, c'est qu'on ait des femmes qui se présentent pour nous. One of my priorities, along with co-chairing with my fantastic colleague Navdeep Bains, will be to make sure we have more women candidates. We are facing a she session. We need more of you. And if you're thinking of running, if you're not sure, it's normal. It takes sometimes 10 times to convince a woman to run. So you're part of the average. We all have different stories to tell. But that being said, please think about it. Take the risk. And we're up for it. We want to help you out. And this will be ultimately a big, big priority of mine because we want to make sure that we have the right team with a lot of women part of it. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Mélanie. Tellement ravie que tu co-présides la campagne nationale et avec Navdeep Bains, bien entendu. Late breaking news that came out over the course of this convention that we are also thrilled about. Mary, over to you to address the important issue of what has been done to date and how you're looking to the future.
Well, thank you for that. Congratulations to Mel, and I love that priority. I think we all, well, I know we all share this, and I think I can say, sitting around a table where half of us are women, that the perspective that comes to this, just like the one that Christia just shared around the global tables, it really does matter because it comes from a lived perspective. It's those conversations that you're also having with other women leaders, or the woman who is working in whatever the job is, particularly our frontline workers or our small businesses or entrepreneurs. You bring to the table that particular perspective. And what I would also say, because it's liberals who are here, and to the incredible volunteers and everyone who has done your part to help get us here sitting in front of you on this panel. It's your terrific work. And I just want you to think about that work, your work, and what that means to the future of this country and the future of a recovery from this she session. Before COVID-19, we made at the very, very heart of our work an inclusive, a path to an inclusive economy that that includes women, 50% of our population, and that includes the range of intersectionalities there as well. So for me, being the small business minister and the international trade minister, I always sort of say, what's my job? My job is start up, scale up, and access new markets for our Canadian businesses. But it can't just be the businesses that have always had the opportunities. It's leading in a very intentional way, leading to make sure that those tools are there, that the investments are there, and that the work and the leadership that it requires, working with the whole coalition, including people in the private sector, labor, and us in government, to take down those barriers that stop people from trying to get ahead. So when you talk about women, and when I think about whether it's the women entrepreneurship strategy or helping Indigenous businesses grow, or helping Black entrepreneurs, what is the one thing that they've been talking about that eludes their ability to participate or to grow their enterprises, or in fact to get into those global markets? Getting access to capital. So when I said earlier that I think about two numbers, $150 billion and 12 trillion, it's because it is this very intentional leadership that we have taken as a government that really looks at how we create opportunities, remove barriers, make the right investments so that women can participate. Not only do they participate, they lead. And that in the leadership in COVID, that they are supported in that leadership because it has been really, really hard. So I often talk about, we put forward social policies, but those social policies are really important economic policies for our country. And I would say that we are at a very great and interesting time for Canadians to be to build back better, to build back resilient, and to build back being competitive on that global stage. Some of the things that we've been doing sort of said, look, we're not going to let COVID-19 stop us from helping small businesses grow and to succeed. So I've been taking virtual trade missions, just like how we're doing this convention virtually. We've been taking virtual trade missions around the world. We've taken them to Asia Pacific. We've taken them to France and to the European Union. We've taken them to, to Mozambique. So we are pursuing and we're pivoting like the way I think our businesses and our entrepreneurs are trying to do across the country. And this is something that has been tremendously exciting to do, not without difficulties, but learning along the way. And all this is to say is that I can't be more proud than I am to be able to sit around this virtual panel with female economic ministers. So not only do we have Melanie leading the effort in our, in politics and in sort of in that next campaign, but we also have a team of women leaders who are also bringing our lens, and therefore the lens and the voices of women, Canadian women across the country, into this building back of our economy out of this pandemic.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for all of the work that you've been doing, whether it's with the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy or these fantastic trade missions with women entrepreneurs. And my next question does look a little bit more to the future. I wonder if you get the sense that Canadians' views and perceptions of the care economy is changing. I'm thinking of the role of nurses, the importance of long-term care workers. I'm thinking, of course, of childcare responsibilities. I hope that maybe the pandemic might be changing our perception of the importance of this work, which has traditionally been taken up by women. What are your views, Christia?
I just unmuted myself. Sorry, guys. I think please unmute yourself. We should all have T-shirts that say that, because that is the experience of COVID. It's a great question, Rachel. And I just want to start by picking up on one thing that Melanie said about the value of having and recruiting women candidates, and also about how hard it is. And as Melanie said that, I immediately had this flashback to recruiting a wonderful woman candidate called Mary Ng. I think, I don't know, Mary, you'll have to tell people whether this is true or not, but I think the conversation that clinched it was when Mary and I took our shoes off and stood back to back, and I proved to her that we are basically the same height. And I said, look, we do need women around the cabinet table, but also having more short women would be good. And I think that was what won you over, right, Mary? But it was hard. It was really, really hard.
She's taller, by the way, for the record.
I was trying to be gracious, Mary, only like a tiny bit, about like 2 millimeters. Anyway, but it was hard to persuade Mary to run. And it was hard to persuade me to run a few years before that. And I do think, I just really want to echo what Melanie said. I think women, I'm not sure why, we each have our own reasons and situations. We maybe are kind of raised to be a little bit less full of braggadocio. We're a little bit more hesitant to see ourselves in that role. And so I would just say to all the great liberals who are listening to us, please heed Melanie's call. And if you are a woman and you're thinking of running, give Melanie a call or anyone else. And if there's a great woman in your life who you think should run, urge her to do it. So I just couldn't resist. Melanie inspired me. On the care economy, Rachel, I think that is a very, very important question. And, I think that when it comes to COVID and when it comes to the COVID recession, the way to have the right treatment is to start with the right diagnosis. And one of the things which is so striking about the recession we're experiencing today, or experienced very profoundly last year, is how different it was from previous economic recessions. This was not an economic shock caused by some internal endogenous problem. It was entirely exogenous. Something happened to us that made us shut the economy down. It's more like a flood or a forest fire than a regular recession. And the places where that pain hit were very specific. You know, some parts of the economy actually are doing better than they were this time last year. Other parts have been really, really hard hit. And that shock is very localized, very specific. The recession has hit women, young people, low-waged workers, small and medium-sized businesses, particularly, and the responsible ministers are here, so I see them both nodding their heads, particularly in tourism and hospitality. That is where the hurt has been. And so I think that it's very, very important that our economic response start with that diagnosis, and it's going to have to be very, very carefully focused on healing those wounds, restoring that economic muscle in those places so that Canada can come roaring back. And that's where the care economy definitely comes into the picture, because many of those workers are in that space. And supporting workers in that space is going to be really, really key to Canada's economic rebound. So, to take a point that Melanie and Diane have talked about, participation of women in the labor force. We've all seen how hard it is, yes, for all parents to participate in the labor force, but the reality is in most families, when there is no childcare, it's the mother who ends up doing that childcare work. It is going to be a generational hit to Canada's economic potential if we can't make it possible for parents, and particularly mothers, who have dropped out of the labor force in much greater numbers than men and than fathers, if we can't make it possible for them to get back to work. And so, that's why I think it's so important to have a focus on early learning and childcare. And, to see it for sure, I think all of us here are feminists. I certainly am, and our Prime Minister is a proud feminist, and that makes such a difference. But early learning and childcare is also an economic policy. It's a real driver of economic growth for everyone. So I think, that is something that we need to be very, very mindful of. And I'm just going to say one final thing on the care economy, Rachel, which is I think that we need to really appreciate, and I do believe, and I hope we don't forget, the extent to which COVID has taught us how dependent we all are on the people who work in the care economy, on nurses, on doctors, on janitors, on cooks, on the people who keep our long-term care facilities running, our hospitals running. They are the people who have literally saved lives and held the hands of our loved ones when we couldn't be there. And I really think that we need to remember how dependent we are on them, and we need to be sure that they have the support and actually the income that they need.
Thank you so much, Chrystia. I think back to Thursday evening and the moment of silence we had at the beginning of the convention. And I was thinking, of course, of the Canadians that have been lost to COVID, but also of all of the sacrifices made by our frontline healthcare workers. So many women I know who are sleeping in their cars because they were nurses in hot zones in COVID wards, and doctors who have not had a vacation in well over a year, in some cases working 24/7. Diane, j'aimerais pouvoir te passer la parole pour aussi pouvoir répondre à cette question très importante. Je ne sais pas si vous avez quelques idées à nous partager.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Rachel. Écoute, je suis tellement d'accord avec tout ce que mes collègues ont dit lors là, de ce panel. Puis, je peux vous dire aussi, c'est ce qui me... Je ne devrais pas dire ce qui me surprend, mais ce que je constate, puis ce que je continue de constater, parce que je pense que je suis la plus vieille actuellement sur le panel, donc avec une certaine expérience de vie aussi, mais c'est de voir et de constater à quel point les femmes sont résilientes, à quel point les femmes, dans toutes les crises qu'on a vécues, les femmes ont continué là, de prendre soin des gens. Les femmes ont continué d'offrir des services à la population. Les femmes ont continué de supporter leurs familles, de supporter leurs enfants, ont été inquiètes comme aidantes naturelles de ne pas pouvoir aller aider leurs parents. Donc, puis moi, je l'ai vu dans des crises, puis là, on a la COVID, mais quand on est en région, puis qu'on a vécu des crises économiques, des femmes qui étaient des salaires d'appoint sont devenues le salaire de la famille et ont continué de prendre soin de la santé mentale de tous les gens qui les entouraient. Puis, Christia, tu parlais tantôt du mot vigilance et nous devons demeurer vigilants parce que lorsque la crise va se terminer et lorsque la vie va reprendre son cours, la tendance souvent, ce qui nous arrive, c'est qu'on oublie parce qu'on se fait happer par le quotidien. Mais nous devons être vigilantes, nous devons être ambitieux. Puis, pour moi, là, une crise, moi qui suis une ancienne intervenante sociale, une crise, c'est un moment, c'est une opportunité qu'on doit saisir pour pouvoir changer des choses, pour pouvoir faire mieux, pour pouvoir avoir un programme qui est ambitieux. Nous sommes des libéraux progressistes, nous sommes ambitieux de nature. Donc, on doit continuer vraiment là, d'être un outil de changement, d'amélioration, puis avec tous les panels qu'il y a eu en fin de semaine, avec les gens qui se sont impliqués, les gens de partout au Canada, on le voit à quel point vous avez à cœur d'avoir un pays qui va être encore mieux, un Canada qui va être encore meilleur, qui va pouvoir offrir des chances égales auprès des femmes, d'aider les femmes. Puis on parle d'intégration, c'est d'intégrer les femmes retraitées. On va devoir continuer, on peut continuer de travailler, on peut de s'adapter, de travailler avec nos collègues pour avoir des mesures en place, autant pour les retraités, autant pour les personnes handicapées. On a parlé d'immigration aussi, puis de continuer de se poser les vraies questions, puis de faire des choix et de ne pas avoir peur de faire des choix, mais des choix qui vont nous aider à aller vers encore mieux pour l'ensemble de la population. Puis je dois vous dire que pour moi, il en va de l'avenir de tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Donc, faisons de cette COVID un événement malheureux, comme on dit. Si on a eu du citron, faisons de la limonade avec. Donc, soyons positifs pour nos gens, puis on va continuer de travailler de façon acharnée, tous nos collègues autour de la table, puis toutes les femmes là, avec qui je travaille. Fait que pour moi, c'est un baume aussi de voir la jeunesse, puis de voir la place que vous prenez. Donc, c'est rassurant.
Ah oui, absolument. Diane, une intervention tellement touchante et j'aime beaucoup la positivité avec laquelle nous allons clôturer ce panel. Mais pour avoir participé à la commission des jeunes libéraux plutôt lors du Congrès, je peux vous confirmer the party is in very good hands. There are a lot of young people that have joined this convention for the very first time, who are going to be volunteers for the very first time. And we are so delighted to welcome them all. As we have said many times during the convention, this is our best attended national convention, and so many new faces have joined us that we are in excellent stead for the next election, whenever it should come. And so thank you all for fabulous women leading the charge on economic portfolios and sharing with us their thoughts on how we can move forward past the she session that we have seen develop over the course of this pandemic. Thanks very much to you all, and back to the main stage.
travaillons d'ardeur et que nous puissions continuer ensemble.
Absolutely, Mona. This has been an inspiring convention and one that we will not soon forget. And now, almost the moment that we've been waiting for, we will hear from our leader. But as we get ready to do that, I'm honored to introduce a very dear colleague of ours, the Member of Parliament for Jour, Dominique Leblanc. À toi, Dom.
So thank you very, very much, Marcy. Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, fellow Liberals. I have the immense pleasure to speak briefly this evening and then introduce our leader and our Prime Minister. Let me begin by thanking all of you for participating, for attending sessions at this convention, for sharing your ideas and your passion for Canada. I've been lucky enough to be attending conventions like these. Obviously, this is our first virtual one, but I've been lucky enough to be attending conventions like these since I was a young Liberal or a young political staffer, or obviously since I was lucky enough to join the National Caucus 20 years ago as a Member of Parliament from New Brunswick. The virtual convention is not the same feeling as seeing old friends and being with one another physically, but obviously it's the safe and appropriate way for us to continue this important tradition of our party at this difficult moment in our country's history. Votre énergie, votre engagement et vos idées ne cessent jamais de nous inspirer et nous motiver. Et j'ai l'immense privilège de servir comme député. Et c'est grâce à des personnes comme vous, à des bénévoles qui bâtissent un mouvement politique inclusif, progressiste et innovateur. My friends, our party is strong, our party is united, it's inclusive, but it's also dedicated to serving all Canadians and every part of our country. As Liberals, we've always debated ideas, as we have in the past few days, about how to build a resilient, sustainable economy, about how to effectively tackle issues as critical as climate change, and how to put a price on pollution, all essential to building a growing and prosperous and sustainable economy. Nous utilisons ces congrès, non pas pour nier, par exemple, l'existence même des changements climatiques, comme font les conservateurs, mais pour discuter des politiques, pour mieux protéger les Canadiens pendant des moments si difficiles et pour renouveler notre engagement fondamental de lutter, par exemple, contre les changements climatiques et bâtir une économie durable pour tout le monde. Our work these past days as Liberals has been focused squarely on Canadians, on how to support and protect all Canadians during these difficult moments, and how to lead Canada into a strong, sustainable, inclusive economic recovery that leaves nobody behind and leaves no region of our country behind. I never cease to be inspired and motivated by conventions like these. Liberals stick together and are united at the difficult moments our country has faced in the past and will always continue to draw strength from one another. Cet esprit d'équipe, cette unité que nous voyons ces derniers jours lors de notre congrès, ce sont les mêmes sentiments qui guident notre caucus et notre Conseil des ministres. Mr. O'Toole and the Conservatives, well, they have a different focus than us. They spend their time going in circles wondering whether or not climate change is real, or how they can weaken the constitutional rights of women, ou comment ils peuvent prétendre qu'ils sont en faveur des langues officielles tout en n'ayant pas le courage de dire qu'ils vont nommer des juges bilingues à la Cour suprême du Canada. The Conservatives even pretend recently they don't want an election. But I remember an evening a few weeks ago where they voted 8 times no confidence in the government. Rather bizarre behavior from people who don't want an election. Mr. O'Toole seems like a leader who wants to play chicken, always hoping somebody else swerves. Well, those aren't the qualities Canadians expect of a real leader. Nos amis au Bloc, ils sont des experts, comme dit souvent notre ami Pablo Rodriguez, ils sont des experts à essayer de fabriquer des chicanes, à essayer de prétendre que le gouvernement du Canada ne peut pas travailler avec les provinces pour aider et appuyer les Canadiens, même dans les moments les plus difficiles. Notre premier ministre, Justin Trudeau, a démontré clairement lors des 29 dernières réunions avec tous les premiers ministres des provinces et des territoires, et ça, juste depuis les 12 derniers mois. Il a démontré que notre gouvernement veut et peut travailler avec les gouvernements des provinces, y compris le gouvernement du Québec, dans l'intérêt des Canadiens. Il ne faut pas s'oublier que M. O'Toole, lui, faisait partie d'un gouvernement qui n'avait même pas le courage, pendant les 9 années qu'ils étaient au pouvoir, de rencontrer les premiers ministres des provinces et des territoires. I have been enormously privileged in my lifetime to know our leader and our prime minister since we were literally kids. In fact, I've known him most of my life. Our mothers were friends for over 40 years, and our dads were friends for over 50 years. When I was 14 years old, the Prime Minister's mother and father, in what, with hindsight, appears to be a moment of some worrisome judgment, asked me to babysit the then 10-year-old Justin, 8-year-old Sasha, and 6-year-old Michelle. So I was the one who led our collective efforts to play telephone jokes on our friends' parents, or ring doorbells and then run away and hide behind the bushes in the neighborhood where we lived in Ottawa. And family weekends spent together skiing at Mont-Tremblant when we were kids cemented a friendship for me, which has been important and enduring for my entire life. Justin Trudeau est véritablement le meilleur ami qu'on pourrait jamais avoir. C'est une personne extrêmement sensible, d'une grande générosité et de compassion. Il est aussi très drôle et extrêmement généreux avec son temps. Il est ouvert aux idées des autres et à comment aller chercher le meilleur de tout le monde. Ces liens d'amitié depuis si longtemps m'ont permis de voir de très proche une personne extraordinaire qui est devenue notre chef et ensuite le premier ministre du Canada. Et depuis les 12 dernières années que nous sommes des collègues au caucus et à la Chambre des communes, j'ai vu la discipline, l'énergie, l'éthique de travail et la rigueur si impressionnant de celui qui guide notre pays depuis les 5 dernières années. The Prime Minister's character and values are what make him the remarkable leader that he is. His love for his amazing wife, Sophie, and their 3 fantastic children is literally inspiring, as is his generosity and his kindness to his friends and to his colleagues. As some of you may know, I went through some difficult health challenges these last 3 years. One night, in the first couple of weeks of the last election, in the fall of 2019, I was in an isolation room at the Hôpital Maisonneuve-Rosemont in Montreal. I just received a stem cell transplant. When the nursing station got a call that the Prime Minister was on his way from the airport to the hospital. The Prime Minister arrived at the end of a long day of campaigning. He came to the hospital and spent over 2 hours with me. We laughed, we told stories, we talked about the election. And that simple gesture, I think, shows the character of the person who leads our country. And it certainly motivated me for the long weeks I had ahead of myself in that isolation room at the hospital in Montreal. And I will never, ever forget that gesture of friendship that the Prime Minister repeats so many times over and over again. These basic values of decency and caring and generosity translate into the work the Prime Minister does every day for Canadians. He never takes his focus off what the government can do for Canadians. and how to build a more prosperous, inclusive, fair, and generous country. Our leader, unlike the Conservatives and the Bloc, believes the national government has a key role in playing to have Canadians' backs, particularly at a moment as difficult as the one we're in now. He says to us over and over again in caucus, in cabinet meetings, that we will do what we have to for as long as we have to protect Canadians, to protect their health, their safety, their economic well-being, and that of the Canadian economy as well. Alors, mes amis, c'est avec énormément de plaisir que je vous présente une courte vidéo et ensuite le Premier ministre prendra la parole. And now, Liberal friends, it's with enormous pride that I present a short video after which the Prime Minister will speak to us. Merci beaucoup.
One of my favorite prime ministers, Wilfrid Laurier, often talked about patriotism and the unifying power of common goals and aspirations. I've seen firsthand that there is so much more that unites us than divides us. We all want safer communities, a cleaner planet, and a good quality of life. We want this for ourselves, for our neighbors, and for our kids and grandkids. In the years ahead, our team will work hard to build on the progress made by the Canadians who came before us. We will champion Canada in all its diversity. We will give voice to the voiceless. And in every decision we make as your government, we will always put this country and its people first.
La pandémie a officiellement un an. Le 11 mars 2020 marquera toujours un avant et un après. Pour les familles et pour les proches, chaque décès a aussi un avant et un après. But even as COVID-19 took hold of our planet, even as this new word took over our lives, we found ourselves talking about other words, too. About words that weren't new at all. Sacrifice and solidarity, compassion and community. When the pandemic hit last year, these words, words that have defined Canadians for generations, were suddenly given new meaning.
The fact is, there's never been a more important time to be involved. We've now hosted 9 different virtual weekends of action, the first of their kind, and made more than 1 million calls to check in with our neighbors and hear their ideas and priorities. En tant que gouvernement, notre priorité absolue est d'assurer la sécurité de tous. Peu importe qui vous êtes, où vous vivez, vous pouvez compter sur nous. Je compte à mon tour sur vous pour veiller à ce que, aujourd'hui comme demain, nous visions ce qu'il y a de mieux, parce que votre participation et votre soutien sont au cœur de notre succès. We've seen Canadians step up to be there for each other. We've watched this happen in big ways and small ways in every community across the country. And that coming together has given us the gift of perspective and the reminder of how important it is to have each other's backs in difficult times.
From March through October, the CERB alone supported 8.9 million Canadians. We have invested in healthcare, increased testing and tracing, and directly supported provinces and territories as they fight the virus. This has been a Team Canada effort.
Mais je veux être très clair avec les Canadiens. Notre objectif, c'est de faire en sorte que la PCU fonctionne pour vous. Notre gouvernement va continuer d'être là pour vous.
There is nothing we won't do to keep you safe and to protect your health.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, Liberals. Dominic, first off, thank you for that introduction. My friend, I can't tell you how happy I am to have you on this team, especially with everything you've been through in the past few years. Even through those health challenges, we knew we could count on you.
your humor, your dedication, your political insights have been extraordinary, and it is so important to have you back at this table, especially in the thick of this crisis. Thank you for all that you do for Canadians, Dom, and for this Liberal movement. And to each of you who is tuning in this weekend, it's so good to have you join us at our 2021 convention. I know that well over half of you are first-time delegates. To everyone who is new, welcome. Thanks for stepping up. And everyone else, it's great to be gathered with you all once again, even virtually. Que ce soit votre premier congrès ou non, les choses sont bien différentes cette année. Quand on était tous ensemble à Halifax en 2018, personne n'aurait pensé que notre prochain congrès serait un congrès virtuel. Peu importe d'où vous vous connectez, mes amis, je suis très content d'être ici avec vous. On va se le dire, l'année a été difficile. On connaît tous des familles qui ont perdu un être cher à cause du virus. On connaît tous quelqu'un qui n'a pas pu faire ses adieux à un grand-parent, un parent ou un ami. Within our own Liberal family, just this fall, we lost a true grit and former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable John Napier Turner. John was not just a good friend, a gifted athlete, and an exceptional politician. He was a remarkable leader who brought people together with his vision for a Canada brimming with hope for the future. And this year, maybe more than ever, I think we've all realized just how powerful that idea can be. Because forced isolation taught us new ways to connect with our friends and neighbors and be there for each other. A global crisis showed that local, individual actions really matter. And a faceless virus allowed us to better see the faces that have been there for us all. The brave nurses I spoke to last month at Victoria General in Winnipeg, the vaccine clinic staff I met in Montreal, and the frontline caregivers I Zoomed with at a retirement home in St. John. The communities celebrating holidays virtually, the PPE drives, the groceries left on porches for neighbors, and Liberals like you. In the last year, this team has truly stepped up. I think of Dr. Doug Ailfson, past and future Liberal MP, who is in the meantime caring for ICU patients during this pandemic. Or current MP Kamal Khera, who went back to help as a nurse at long-term care home during the first wave and is now administering vaccines. However you've helped, and I know a lot of you have connected with Canadians on phone calls and during weekends of action, you remind us that when we talk about hope and hard work, when we talk about sunny ways, we're talking about you. Ensemble, on a accompli beaucoup de choses depuis 5 ans, et juste dans la dernière année, on en a fait énormément. Mais le travail est loin d'être terminé. Pendant qu'on lutte pour en finir avec la pandémie, et on est dans les derniers mois, on l'espère, il faut se préparer pour ce qui vient après. Et nous, au Parti libéral, on sait qu'un gouvernement doit travailler pour tout le monde, pour tous les parents, tous les travailleurs, toutes les petites entreprises, tous les jeunes et toutes les personnes âgées. Recently, I spoke to Najma and Karim. They're parents and small business owners from Toronto who'd written to me about what it's like not just to raise a family during a pandemic, but to run a restaurant too. As Najma shared, it's really tough. Karim and Najma work hard. They put their heart and soul into building their restaurant from the ground up. They gave back to their community. In other words, they did everything right. They couldn't have planned for a global pandemic, and they shouldn't have to face one alone. When times got tougher than they could ever have expected, when the regular lunch crowd they rely on started working from home, they needed a government that would have their back, that listened to the real challenges they face and then put in place real support. Because at the end of the day, that's what politics should be about. Real solutions to real problems. I know that's why I got into politics a dozen years ago, and I know that's why you've joined in too. So what does having people's backs look like? What does that mean for Najma and Karim? Well, it means that instead of worrying about the rent on their restaurant, they could count on the rent subsidy to bridge them through this crisis. It means that instead of laying people off because they couldn't make payroll, they were able to keep their employees on the job with the wage subsidy. And it means that instead of losing sleep over the cost of raising a family, they were able to use the Canada Child Benefit to buy school supplies like the tablet their kids need for classes from home. La dernière année a été difficile pour Najma et Karim, et pour bien d'autres familles et propriétaires de petites entreprises. Mais comme l'a dit Najma, tout soutien qui aide à traverser cette tempête est comme un rayon d'espoir à travers les nuages. Ce qu'on fait, on le fait pour des gens comme Karim et Najma. Et on va continuer d'être là pour tous les Canadiens. My friends, here's the thing. There are over 400,000 kids who were lifted out of poverty these past years with programs like the Canada Child Benefit. Well, when some of them are at risk of going hungry again because of this pandemic, that means there's still work to do. Across the country, there are seniors who have the secure retirement they deserve because we increased the guaranteed income supplement. But too many of them didn't get the care they needed in their seniors' home this spring, so there's still work to do. And to the Asian Canadians, Black Canadians, Indigenous peoples, and people living with disabilities who make this country stronger, to the LGBTQ2 communities and the racialized communities and the faith communities that make Canada richer, when anyone, anywhere faces racism, discrimination, or hatred, when anyone, anywhere feels the weight not just of this pandemic, but of inequity and injustice, there's still work to do. Mes amis, quand il y a des obstacles devant nous, que ce soit en lien avec la pandémie, l'ALENA ou tous les autres défis qu'on relève ensemble, notre équipe libérale est toujours claire par rapport aux valeurs qu'on défend. On est là pour les Canadiens. On est là pour la classe moyenne et ceux qui travaillent fort pour s'y joindre. Et on va toujours avoir un plan progressiste pour bâtir une économie forte et propre qui fonctionne pour tous. As liberals, we know what real change means. Because what this team knows is that finding real solutions means addressing the real challenges people face. And that's something that Erin O'Toole's Conservative Party just can't quite grasp. How disconnected do you have to be to admit that you would have cut CERB, a lifeline for millions of people, during the worst economic crisis in a century? How disconnected do you have to be to call young people lazy when their summer jobs disappeared because of a global pandemic? How disconnected do you have to be to flirt with disinformation on public health and vaccines while a deadly virus takes loved ones, friends, and neighbors? And how disconnected do you have to be to refuse to admit climate change is real, even as people's basements flood and wildfires tear through communities? The problem for Erin O'Toole is that he's not interested in real solutions to real problems. In fact, he's already shown that he's willing to say different things to different people at different times if he thinks it'll help him get ahead. He says he wants to make communities safer, but to get the support of the gun lobby, he promised to make assault weapons legal again. He says he defends a woman's right to choose, but to win the Conservative Party leadership, he told his MPs they could introduce anti-choice laws. When I first ran for Liberal leader, I said that the debate over a woman's right to choose was finished. So we made sure you could only be a Liberal candidate if you agreed to protect that right. In 2015, we laid out our plan for a stronger middle class. Well, the first thing we did after that election was to cut taxes for the middle class by raising them on the wealthiest 1%. In 2019, we promised even stronger gun control. And last year, we banned assault weapons. And at the start of this crisis, we told Canadians we would have your back. So we rolled out CERB, we created the wage subsidy, we invested in schools, in healthcare, and in vaccines. In fact, on vaccines, while Erin O'Toole's Conservatives gleefully told Canadians it might be years until they got their shot, the reality is very different. Minister Anand and the Liberal team surpassed our promise of 6 million vaccines by the end of March, and by the end of last week, we got to 9.5 million doses. There are millions more vaccines on the way, and we're on track to meet our commitment that every Canadian who wants to will be fully vaccinated by the end of the summer. Dans notre équipe libérale, on n'attend pas pour passer de la parole à l'action. Quand vient le temps de mettre de l'avant des idées progressistes, on ne tourne pas autour du pot, on agit. Beaucoup de gens ne le savent pas, mais quand on compte tout le soutien fourni aux Canadiens depuis le début de la pandémie, c'est 8 $ sur 10 qui proviennent de notre gouvernement. En d'autres mots, 80% de l'argent qui sert à aider les gens à traverser la crise est fourni par le gouvernement fédéral. L'année dernière, plus de 8 millions de personnes ont eu recours à de l'aide financière fédérale pour payer leur loyer et mettre de la nourriture sur la table. Et on a déployé les forces armées et la Croix-Rouge canadienne dans les CHSLD pour aider nos personnes âgées les plus vulnérables. Tout ça, ça a le mérite de mettre les choses très au clair. Pendant que le Bloc fait semblant d'être le seul parti qui peut parler au nom des Québécois, nous, on livre la marchandise pour les Québécois avec de l'aide directe pour les aînés, les entreprises, les familles et les travailleurs. Quand vient le temps de livrer pour les Québécois, ça prend des Québécois au gouvernement. Nous, les libéraux, on prend des mesures historiques pour promouvoir et protéger le français, pas seulement au Québec, mais partout à travers le Canada. Et on est le seul parti qui a un vrai plan pour s'attaquer au changement climatique et pour léguer un avenir plus propre et plus prospère à nos enfants. Dans notre plan, on interdit les plastiques à usage unique. On protège 25% des océans et des terres du Canada pendant qu'on plante 2 milliards d'arbres et on atteint la cible de zéro émission nette d'ici 2050. On préfère choisir l'action au lieu de la division. On est toujours là pour les Québécois et pour tous les Canadiens et on va continuer d'avoir un message rassembleur au lieu de chercher la chicane. My friends, what it all comes down to is this. Which party has a real plan for the real problems in the real world? Some refuse to accept reality, all while offering falsehoods and division. Us? Well, this team is focused on solutions to the challenges we face, from health to jobs, from human rights to the environment. This team is focused on building back better for the middle class and people working hard to join it, while taking climate action to create good jobs and keep our economy growing for years to come. In other words, our team is focused on a better future for all Canadians. Les militants libéraux comme vous, vous avez toujours été là pour ouvrir la voie quand est venu le temps de réfléchir aux grands enjeux et d'agir. Ça a été le cas pour le droit égal au mariage et pour la légalisation du cannabis. Vous avez tenu votre bout, même quand le Parti conservateur s'attaquait à ces mesures. D'ailleurs, avec le Parti conservateur, on voit bien que plus ça change, plus c'est pareil. Pendant leur congrès, ils ont refusé de reconnaître que les changements climatiques sont réels. Contrairement à ça, vous, depuis le début, vous avez toujours continué de pousser pour faire avancer les choses. Au cours de la dernière année, vous avez demandé à plus d'1 million de Canadiens leurs idées pour bâtir un avenir meilleur. Et aujourd'hui, au plus grand congrès politique du Parti libéral de tous les temps, on intègre ces idées à notre plan. My friends, you've always been the heart of our liberal movement. On the big things that are still ahead, just like on everything we've already done, I know I can count on you to remind us that better is always possible. Because I know that you'll be there with your energy, your positivity, and above all, your conviction that together we can create an even better country to call home. The conversations we've had this weekend, the policy debates ongoing, the ideas we've shared, this is not just about policy. This is about people. It's about parents like Najma and Kareem. In Kareem's words, he came to Canada to build a good life for his kids and to give back to this country. That was what he dreamed of. And that's what so many parents dream of. It's about kids who can feel excited for their future and one day build a life for themselves in a clean, thriving economy. And it's about neighbors and friends who will each have a real and fair chance at success. Les prochains temps ne seront pas toujours faciles, mais malgré tout, on reste optimiste avec une vision positive pour l'avenir. On continue de travailler pour que les petites entreprises reviennent en force, pour que plus de familles puissent s'acheter une première maison et pour que nos communautés soient plus sécuritaires et plus en santé. Together, we get to choose a brighter future. Together, we get to grab hold of a once-in-a-generation moment to build the kind of tomorrow we all want to see. So reach out your hand to a neighbor who had a blue or orange or green lawn sign last time around. Phone up a friend who has a different perspective and maybe didn't vote for us in the past. Perhaps they're feeling disenchanted. Perhaps they're feeling left behind because they know climate change is real. Tell them about the plan that together this Liberal team is building with hope and hard work. And then, and this is important, listen to the things that they need us to do even better. In this past year, we've all been each other's neighbors. If anyone ever doubted it, COVID-19 has shown us that we're always stronger together, when we're there for each other, when we lean on each other, when we listen to each other. So the partisanship that's far too often the norm in Ottawa, we know that's not who Canadians are. We are people who get that we're in this together. People who understand that even when we're doing okay, if our neighbor is struggling, we're all worse off. Who understand that when all of our kids have a chance at success, when all of our entrepreneurs have an opportunity to thrive, when all of our communities have clean air and clean water, the future is brighter for all of us. The future is brighter for each of us. Ensemble, on traverse une crise sans précédent. Et ensemble, on se prépare à bâtir un avenir qui va être meilleur que tout ce qu'on a connu avant. Il y a de meilleurs jours qui nous attendent et je sais qu'ensemble, on va y arriver. Merci, mes chers amis. Thank you so much, dear friends.
Wow! C'est toujours motivant, mais encore plus inspirant d'entendre Justin Trudeau prendre la parole, surtout aujourd'hui. Et alors que nous poursuivons ce congrès unique en son genre, le message passionné qu'il a livré aujourd'hui fera avancer le travail que nous effectuons tous pour rebâtir un meilleur pays, plus vert, plus inclusif et plus prospère. Merci, Justin. Et maintenant, je demanderai à Béatrice Keller-Rafoul, la directrice du scrutin de notre Congrès, de nous transmettre les résultats du vote pour les postes à pourvoir au sein du conseil d'administration, pour les postes brigués des dirigeants au sein des commissions et pour les politiques prioritaires officielles du parti. Alors, Béatrice, à toi la parole.
Merci, Mona. Quel congrès on a eu. J'ai les résultats de Simply Voting et je vais vous annoncer ça tout de suite, mais je dois prendre quelques secondes pour remercier parce que vous savez, les congrès, c'est les gens qui font la différence. It's always people that make the difference at these conventions. And I'd like to thank a few people before I announce the results. First, I'd like to thank in the work that I had to do, I'd like to thank Azam Ismail and his team at the Liberal Party. And in particular, I'd like to thank Monique Trottier, Phil Zrin, Esme Parizeau, Jessica Cardell, and Luc Vaudry. Jessica and Luc have been with me for several months as we put together this part of the conference. And now I have the pleasure to congratulate and announce the new board. Voici les nouveaux membres de votre conseil. President Suzanne Cowan. Vice President English, Mira Ahmed. Vice-président français, Élise Bartlett. Policy Secretary Mike Morrison, Party Secretary Sam Balazar, Seniors Chair Hillary Williamson, Indigenous Chair Susie Keys, Indigenous Chair Male Conrad Desjarlais, the National Women's Chair Alicia Natividad, and the Young Liberals Chair Lucas Borshenko. I'm also pleased, je suis tellement contente de vous annoncer les résultats des commissions. And they are as follows. Organizing chair for the Women's Commission, Amarit Brar, and Secretary for the Seniors Commission, Ian Monroe. So I'd also like to just add that the results from the voting for the policy resolutions you will find on the website for the Congress momentarily. So feel free to look. And merci, bonsoir, et back to you, Mona. Or Marcy.
That's fine. I will take that. Thank you so much, Beatrice. Merci beaucoup. I'm sure you will agree, this has been an absolutely amazing weekend. When we first opened the convention, we had already seen registration numbers at the highest levels in our party's history. Well over 4,000 people have joined us in the past 2 days. Canadians from coast to coast to coast joined together to keep Canada moving forward. We broke records, we even created new ones, reinvented what it means to keep growing the most open and inclusive movement in Canadian politics. And I just want to add, Rachel, Terry, and Mona, it has been a pleasure working with you, and a huge thank you to everybody behind the scenes working so very hard.
Merci beaucoup, Marcy. Et nous tenons à tous vous remercier de votre participation cette fin de semaine, la passion et l'enthousiasme dont vous avez fait preuve alors que nous naviguons à un tout nouveau type de congrès ont été absolument incroyables. Même si nous espérons tous être en mesure de nous réunir en personne lors de notre prochain congrès, je pense qu'en tant que parti, nous pouvons être fiers du programme, des politiques et des discussions de cette fin de semaine. Lorsque nous pouvons réunir tant de personnes pour échanger et partager de nouvelles idées,